Hey everyone, Brittany Lynch here, and welcome to another session of the Handmade Business Summit. And once again, we have an amazing session planned. This session is with Brittany from bhook.com, and we're going to be talking about time management and productivity. And this is a very important topic for anyone who's thinking about or already running a handmade business. And Brittany is going to be a great host for this session. She is a one-woman show who runs a blog, has a podcast, does videos in her business. So making sure she manages her business in a way that is productive for her lifestyle is really, really important. So I'm really looking forward to learning more from her on this topic. Brittany, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Brittany, it's great to be here. I'm really excited about this one.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And why don't we kick things off by just tell me a little bit about how you got started as a handmade business owner.
Well, when I first realized that you could crochet and learn how to do it on YouTube for free, I was completely hooked. I desperately was trying to find a hobby that kept my creative juices flowing and just really kept me excited about life, because what I was doing, what really took up most of my time, just didn't fuel me up the way I needed. I think a lot of us can relate to that, who are, side hustlers who are trying to build a business and they're still working full time because they have to. They need to earn that income. Most people don't really get their creativity, and their full-time job doesn't fuel their fire. So I was one of those people. I decided that one day I was going to go to my local craft store and wandered aimlessly up and down the aisles, and I was coming home with a hobby. It didn't matter what it was. So I looked at all sorts of different things, and my main objective was to find something that I could do something but still be around my husband. A lot of our time together was spent in the evening, but that was also my time to be able to do things that make me happy and sort of fill me up. And I didn't want something that would bring me to a complete separate room of the house. So I get to the yarn aisle, and my sister at the time was pregnant. So I thought, well, I could probably make her a baby blanket, and that would be really special, and it probably would be pretty easy. And I had no clue at the time what I was doing at all. My mom and my grandmother both were crocheters, but for some reason I thought knitting sounded so much easier, because I thought, well, I've got two things to hold on to. So it just seems easier, right? That's just what was going through my mind. So I got my first pair of knitting needles. They were, I don't remember if they were the 12-inch or the 14-inch, but I knew nothing about how you have to put the whole project on the needle. So here I am thinking that I can fit a whole baby blanket on this knitting needle. And I bought one ball of yarn, and I thought that would get the job done. So I go home, turn on YouTube, and try to teach myself how to knit. And long story short, it was just a total disaster. I was able to make the stitches, but I couldn't fix my mistakes. And because of that, I would frog, and then I would knit up a few more rows. And then I would frog it again, and I would knit up more rows, and I would make mistakes. And because I couldn't fix them, and because I was just not having any fun by redoing my work constantly, I sort of gave up on that. But I had a crochet hook that I bought when I was trying to fix those mistakes. And I thought, well, I should probably listen to Mom. She tells me that crochet is a lot easier, so I'm going to give this a try. And I went back to YouTube with my 4.5 millimeter boy standard crochet hook and my ball of yarn that I was trying to make this blanket out of. And I just started working a single crochet, and it just worked. I was so shocked that I just got it. And when I realized that this hobby was so much fun and you could do so much with it, I really just wanted to share that with the world. But at the time, I really had no clue how I was going to do that. So it took me a while to figure out how I was going to, spread the love of crochet, this new crazy passion that I had. And that looked for me at the time of doing YouTube videos. And my reason for that was, throughout my learning process, I found myself asking more questions than finding answers for some of the videos that I was watching. And that made me realize that my particular style of learning wasn't really covered in those infinite number of videos online. So my sole purpose was to try to fill those gaps And now Bee Hooks does look a lot different today than it did back then. Back then I was trying to do Etsy and sell my goods and that sort of thing. I really had no direction, but it's taken me, well, about 5 years or so to really settle in, figure out what I want to do and what I want to accomplish with it, but more importantly, to serve my mission. And that is to just help people be better crocheters and knitters, because we all know, we all experience that yarn can do so much more than just make pretty things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you touched on a lot of the same ideas that a lot of the other people I've spoken to on this topic have talked about, which is it's a little bit of a journey in the way that you started the business. I don't know if you would even call it that when you started it. It's a different than where you've ended up, and you've grown so much from YouTube to now you have your blog and you have a podcast. So it's always a journey when you start a handmade business, and it's great to hear
Yeah.
other people's journey and how they got there. Now, you mentioned it's been 5 years now, about 5 years now. Is this your full-time job or your full-time focus at this point?
It is. I am one of the lucky, few that can say that it is my full-time job, but it took me about 3 years or so to be able to make it become that. And it was really only the support of my husband that I was able to do that. And I think that's an important part of being productive and uh, time management. I mean, you have to have somebody in your life who really, really supports what you do and believes in you. And even though at the time I was making enough income from what I was doing, I probably, had I not had his support, would have been able to do that. So I think that's important to realize, that you have to have the right people in your life who are able to, well, just believe in you and believe in what you do. Because when you start, when you take that plunge and you quit your full-time job, it's a really scary time. And if you're not making the same amount of money that you were before, well, that's difficult. That's a difficult pill to swallow, but it's more of an investment. You have to realize that you're not going to make as much from day one as you will from day 500. It's an evolution. You're going to figure out more things and you'll eventually earn more. And you have to have that support in your life to be able to get you through that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, there's two things that you said there that I want to touch on. And the first is that, it took you about 3 years to go full time. And, when you're listening to that, at first, some people might think, wow, that's quite a long time. But really, for me, what I think is that's so incredible that you can build your own full-time business in 3 years, or whether it's 2 years or 5 years or 6 years. If you think about it, so many people go to college or university for 4 years full time in order to get the knowledge that they need to then start a career. And so really it's quite amazing that you were able to go in a 3 year period to reach a point where you could leave your job and be full time doing something that you love.
Yeah, definitely.
And the second thing that I want to mention is I totally agree with you about having a good support network. It's emotionally, as you said, financially, maybe you're at the point where your income was already at that point, but having that kind of support network around you to help make sure that that they're there for you as you start this journey, that's a huge thing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a chance. It's a chance you have to take. We were both terrified about that decision, but I mean, certainly if you ask me, and I think if you would ask him too, it's really the best situation. It was the best decision that we could have ever made, because we both live happier lives because of that one decision that terrified us, because we didn't know that what was waiting on the other side of that was this happiness and the ability to sort of craft the life that we want together.
Yeah, which is really, I think, the ultimate goal for why to start your own business. It's to have more control over what makes you happy and brings you happiness in your life. And I know that you've done such a great job of building a business that you are happy with, that fulfills you, but also, and this is the topic of today's presentation, also is in the parameters of how much time you want to put into it. And I know that when we were talking before we started this call, you mentioned, you're very strict about having 40 hours and you get all the things that you need to get done for that week in that time so that you can have work-life balance. So let's talk about that a little bit more. You know, you have a podcast, you do a weekly video, you design, and you have a blog. How do you get all of this done?
Well, I'll preface all of this by saying that being able to do it full time is a big, huge help. When I was working as a side hustle, like doing this as a side hustle and working a full time job, I wasn't able to do a podcast or a weekly video. I only had a specific amount of time. So the fact that I am able to do it full time is a big help, and I was able to add those things on later. But I want everyone to know that it's not a requirement, not at all. You don't have to do it full time to have a content focused business, especially if you manage your time in the best way possible. So that leads me into the biggest reason why I'm able to get everything done, and that's because I manage my time crazy efficiently, like almost to a fault. And it's because of that, those time management skills that I've developed through those days where I was doing it part-time and through these 2 years of doing it full-time. When your whole schedule opens up to do everything you love to do, it's like the floodgates open. So really that first year of going full-time, it was a huge learning curve for me to manage my time well. And it's a process too. Just like building a business is a process, being better and more efficient at managing your time and different projects and everything you have going on, it is a process that leaves clues but isn't set in stone for every single person.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with your schedule, do you set firm working hours in your business? Is that something that's important to you?
I do. I like to maintain sort of the same schedule that I had before when I worked full time. One of the biggest things I struggled with when I first went full time was hearing the feedback from the people around me that said, "Oh, well, you can do anything you want. You don't have a job now. You can do whatever." And I always thought, "No, I do have a job. I have the best job I could ever ask for, and I want to treat it like the best job I could ever ask for." So when you get a new job, you don't just go into it thinking, "Oh, I can show up whenever I want
Right.
to," or "I don't really have to prepare for this meeting," or whatever it is. You really put a lot of your effort and energy into being the best you can possibly be. And that's the approach that I took with it. So for me, I work best if I have a routine. Not necessarily that I'm doing the same things every day, but I need to have structure to my day. And because I am married and my husband goes away, he, works away from home, then my schedule really does revolve a little bit around his schedule. And that's really my own personal choice. I like to work when he's at work. So that way, when he's at home, we can be together and we can spend time together. And it is a little bit easier for me because I'm not a work at home mom. So we don't have kids at this point, and I really can manage my entire day. But I, just because we don't have kids doesn't mean we don't still value and share that family time together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's something that is so important when you start your handmade business or if you're currently in one, whether you want to make it full time or not, it's just setting clear parameters around when it's work time and when it's, family time or hangout time or social time, because it's very easy to have the two bleed into each other. You can just pick up your phone and check your email or, send a quick Instagram or whatever it is. And, I have found that that was when anxiety started to increase in me when I was trying to find that balance. So setting clear parameters around that, I think, is very helpful.
Yeah, my typical day, like the schedule of it does change a little bit from day to day, but on average, my workday starts at about 6 a.m. and it wraps up mostly at about 4:30 or so. Now, I do reserve some of my crochet time for the evening, and that's sort of like outside those boundaries. But for the most part, 6 to 4:30, I am in work mode, and there is no stepping out of it until the end of the day, where I can close that door and leave it all behind.
Okay, so I think that's a great strategy. And even stepping back on a higher level, let's talk a little bit about how you plan your week, or how you plan, each day, each week, and each month. Like, what does your planning process look like? Do you have a methodology for that?
I do. Now, I like to break down my planning sessions based on project, because there's no like one size fits all kind of situation. So when you're doing different types of content, and this might not relate to everybody, but just to sort of prove the point and elaborate on it a little bit more, when you're creating a pattern, if you're, writing a pattern, designing a pattern, or that sort of thing, you're going to plan differently to get that done than you would, say, if you have a podcast where you have to schedule calls and record things and do editing, and video is sort of another component to that as well. You've got the filming sessions, you've got more editing and that sort of thing. And each one of those activities take a different type and a different approach to planning. So typically what I'll do for the pattern side of things is work on that on a quarterly basis. I think a lot of designers do this as well. You sort of look to the next quarter and think about things like, what holidays are coming up? What season is it? And what projects can I potentially create that I can promote and share around those times? Now, for the podcast, the approach I take to that is in mega batching. And this is not something that I have made up myself. There's actually he's sort of like my unspoken online mentor when it comes to productivity, and that's Michael Hyatt. He
Hmm.
does mega batching. And I sit down for 2 days and I have 6 podcast interviews. That's 3 a day. That's typically about 3 hours that I'm in that recording mode. I'm using my voice a whole lot. And that's what I found to be like my personal limit. There are people out there who can do a lot more than that. I typically am very comfortable with 3 a day. So in doing that, I'm able to create a month and a half, because I have a weekly show, of content in 2 days. And that helps you remove that like content hamster wheel that some people talk about. It's just completely out of the equation because you're knocking it out in 2 days. Now, being a one-woman show, I do every aspect of the podcast. I'm not just doing the interviews, I'm doing the editing as well. And so that will typically happen over the course of that 1 week. So I will dedicate 1 week to a podcast batch. Now, looking at the video side of things, I take an even different approach to this. Now, I still do mega batching for Be Hooked TV, which is something I started this year, and that was a weekly show that was a little bit more focused on the topics that maybe aren't so visual. There's a lot of things that you can learn about knitting and crocheting that it's more suited for me to sit here and tell you about it rather than to show you. So I took the mega batch approach for that, but I planned that whole season in one sitting. So I knew every single video I was going to be creating for that entire season on day one, but I was only recording about 2 to 3 episodes a day. And again, that was comfortable for me. And knowing my personal limits, knowing that I was able to do one or do 3 podcast episodes a day and do 2 to 3 videos per day, that was something that I had to figure out and just had to really tune into myself and how I was feeling and my energy levels and that sort of thing. And that was a process that took, a couple of months to figure out. As far as the day to, well, I would say more the weekly stuff. Now, I'm using a tool that everybody has access to. It's completely free to do all of this, and that is the Google Suite. Like, I use the Google Suite for pretty much everything. When I'm planning those quarterly patterns, I'm using a spreadsheet, just Google Sheets, to organize everything there. For the podcast episodes, the mega batches, I'm using a Google Sheet for that as well. And for the seasons, I'm using a Google Sheet. And for the weekly stuff, I still use Google, but I'm using Google Calendar, and specifically in a time blocking manner.
Okay, so there's so much I want to talk about with what you just said, but I love the concept of mega blocking, and that's really, really powerful. And that's the same approach I've taken to a lot of the processes we use in our own business. But for a lot of the people who maybe are watching this class, maybe they're not quite in content production yet. Maybe their focus is on selling at craft fairs. And so they might be having to produce items to sell at that craft fair. So would you recommend the same concept of mega blocking for essentially anything someone's working on? And how could we apply it to someone who maybe is creating items to sell at the craft fair?
Yeah, I think you can apply mega batching in terms of making a lot of the same thing. I think it really just depends on how you personally like to work. I know for me, I don't really love to do the same thing over and over. I like to see a progression. But if you wanted to take this approach, I could see where, let's say you had to make 15 hats. Then you crocheted the band first. Let's say it was a bottom up hat and you're working on the band, you crocheted all 15 of those. And then you pick up and start working the next the next portion of that repeat, and you're doing it all systematically, and it sort of feels like you're spinning your wheels and you're not really getting anywhere at that point. But once you get to the end of that, you're completely done. For
Yeah,
me, one thing I struggle with is starting and finishing and starting and finishing and starting it. That's just so monotonous for me. It doesn't work for my own style. But I think you can take this mega batching approach to making items as well.
yeah, I think so. And I think the one of the ways that I would approach it is I would, think about, okay, what sort of inventory do I need to create for, this show or the other show, and create a little bit of an inventory list. And then maybe it's 15 hats, as you said. And partly it's about understanding, as you said, your own energies and how you work. So for me, I would probably focus on getting all 15 of those hats done first before moving on to the 15 scarves that I had to do. And the reason for that, and this is where mega batching is really helpful, is you become more efficient, right? You remember that pattern so much better. You're in the flow of that specific style of working, and you're able to reduce your time essentially for each item because you have overlap that doesn't need to be repeated each time. And that's the same, I would imagine, for your podcast. You're not going to necessarily test your mic 3 different times before each interview. You're doing it the one time, which is where batching becomes really helpful. So as I look at applying this to wherever you are for your unique situation, I think how I would approach it is I would stop and ask myself, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? What are those tasks? And maybe it's creating stuff for craft fairs, maybe it's launching a blog or a podcast. And then I would create the itemized to-dos of each thing and see where are there opportunities for me to batch the workload. Is that how you would approach it?
Yes, I would definitely look at the situation from a zoomed out perspective. Look at what the end goal is. What do you need to have done? And then look at when you have to have that done. So you know your what and you know your when, and then you can spread that out accordingly, however it works best for you. So that way you sort of create a roadmap so you know if you're on schedule or not. It's really easy to just push things off, wait until the last minute, and then you're like, oh no, I have to make an entire blanket in a week.
Yeah.
You can completely avoid that if you just sort of take that zoomed out look and really just look at the time that you have available between now and then, and
Mhm.
spreading it out on the days where it works best for you to work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that just getting a plan rather than flying by the seat of your pants is really going to help with reducing the feeling of overwhelm and just naturally increasing your productivity. But I know one of the areas that people often struggle with is just prioritizing what to focus on that day. So, do you have any advice for someone who is maybe unclear on what to prioritize? How can someone organize and prioritize what needs to get done?
Well, I think there's two parts to this question. One is figuring out what is the priority, and two, figuring out how that compares to the other things that you have to get done. The first and foremost, I think it's important to realize your own personal limitations. Now, they typically say that you should only focus on 3 things, just 3 tasks a day, and that's it. And when I first heard that, I thought, you're crazy. I can do more than 3 things in a day. But the reality of it is that it's kind of difficult to switch your focus that many times when you have a never-ending task list or something that has 10 things on it. You look at that at the start of the day and you're like, I'm not going to get this done. And so that just sets the tone for your whole day. So for me, I like to think about the element of task switching, and it's something I've read quite a bit about because I found it to be really fascinating after that point. And there's a lot of studies that show that it takes about 20 minutes for somebody to refocus once they've been distracted or once they get into something else. So if you think about that and you think about how many hours you're dedicating to work that day, 20 minutes could be a pretty big chunk.
Lots.
So if you're sitting down and you're like, I'm going to write a blog post and, spend 30 minutes or whatever, and then from there I'm going to go film a video, and then after that I'm going to go record a podcast. Well, those are all really different things, and they take a certain amount of time to get yourself in that zone. So realizing how you work efficiently is probably the first approach that I would take. And the only way you can do that is to just just experiment with different things and notice when you're not doing so great. Notice when you're not so productive, or when you feel like things are just out of control. That's probably a good sign to you that you're stretching yourself a little bit too much. Maybe you should try to do one less task on your list. I think the other part to that is figuring out like what actually is the priority. And for me, a lot of that comes from the deadline. The deadline can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. I think if you look at it on the bad side of things, it can be stressful, right? We've got to make 15 hats by next month, and that deadline kind of looms over you. But I think if you take the positive approach to that and say that I know that I have a month to work on this, that is actually going to be your motivation to get it done. So for me, since I'm not really making or selling goods, I can't necessarily speak to that. But as far as doing a weekly tutorial, we'll say, well, I know that every single weekend people are looking to me. They're expecting a tutorial, and that is my motivation. So yeah, it's a deadline, but I just choose to look at it from the positive side of things. So you can factor in your deadline when trying to figure out what the priority is. For me, my 2 big priorities every single week is podcast and tutorial. I need to get that out. People are depending on me, and that's really what I love to do. So it's not like it's a difficult thing. But from there, everything else sort of takes I wouldn't say a backseat approach to that, but everything falls in line after those 2 things. So I also like to arrange the week in order for me to keep up with those deadlines by themed days, which really helps me to plan. And then of course the time blocking is really big to helping me know not only what I have to prioritize, but how much time I actually have to do that.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think this is, again, it's all a process and a journey, and you've continued to refine your system as you've gotten more clear on what your business looks like. And I think that as I think about a lot of people starting their business, they're not exactly sure what tasks they even need to do in order to create that success, right? And so there's a
Yeah.
trial and error process where you're doing a lot of different things and you don't know what's going to stick, you don't know what's going to work. And so it can often feel more challenging to create that structure. But as you start getting that clarity, it becomes a lot easier. You have a weekly podcast and you have a weekly video. So I'd say part of the I think challenge for a lot of people is they're not setting parameters around what their business looks like. And so I would encourage anyone who's watching this as they're starting their business, from day one to just start setting some guidelines for creating a schedule. And that might be, hey, I'm launching a new blog. And right now, because I have a full-time job or I have kids at home or both, I feel confident that I can release a blog post on the second Wednesday of every month. And you're just committing to that one thing, right? And what I always tell people is you can always add more, right? But get into that routine first where you feel like you're going through the motion and you're hitting your deadline, you're hitting your schedule, then you can add to it. So you have to kind of force yourself to carve out deadlines for yourself as a handmade business owner so that then, to your point, you can start reverse engineering and scheduling the other areas.
Exactly.
So I think that that's a really big part of it. And then, okay, so we've talked a little bit about the high level of planning. What about morning routine? You know, if you read anything about productivity or time management, you'll see a lot about the mention of a morning routine. Do you have a morning routine that you do to kind of launch your days successfully?
I do, and to be honest, I could not get through the day without my morning routine. And I struggled with this one a lot because I just wanted to get right to it. I wanted to wake up as soon as my feet hit the floor, go to the office, and start working. But that catches up to you really quickly. It didn't take me long to realize that when you're go, go, go all the time, you sort of let your own personal care fall away, that you can never be your best self in your business or for your family. So that was a really important realization for sort of kickstarting the morning routine. But then I started adding elements that were more for personal development. And that has really been a turning point for me as far as being able to plan and, well, have big ideas and actually see them through to finish. So I mentioned before, my morning usually starts at 6 o'clock. I'm not running to the office at 6 o'clock. I'm typically getting up, and honestly, the first thing I do is chug a big glass of lemon water. There is nothing like being hydrated in the morning. You've been sleeping for several hours, you are completely dehydrated, and lemon water is just really refreshing, but it's also sort of a kick to the system to like say, hey, it's time to get up now. Like that lemon juice really just wakes me up. And from there, I spend some time with my husband. He's getting ready for work. We have breakfast together, and that's important for both of us because we enjoy that time. I enjoy that time with him and seeing him before he goes. And so we'll sit down for a little bit. We'll do that. We've got some fur babies as well, so I'll kind of tend to them and sort of take care of them. And the next thing I do is, it was sort of a habit that I had developed in my full-time job, right? We get up, we put some makeup on, or we do our hair, or, we get dressed, we put like actual clothes on and go to work. And I wanted to make sure I stuck with that. I didn't want to be the person who was in their pajamas all day long. Nobody feels on their game if they're in their pajamas. It's like chill mode, right? So I always get in the bathroom, do my facial routine, like clean my face, all that stuff, put a little bit of makeup on, and do my hair and like put clothes on. I noticed that, there are some days you're experimenting, right? When you're trying out different things for a morning routine. And when I experimented on the days where, say, I just wore some leggings to work that day, or maybe didn't put any makeup on my face, I could feel it. I didn't feel like I could be very productive. I didn't feel like I could, hop on the camera, like if I needed to do a Instagram post or something like that. And I realized I wasn't my most productive self when I didn't do this really simple thing that I don't have to do. I'm not usually seeing anybody on a day-to-day basis, but I like to feel like I'm presentable and look presentable. So from there, I am usually up by about an hour or so at this point. And sometimes I'll throw an exercise, a little exercise session in between there. That's usually not every day. Um, but from there, I will have my coffee. I like to wait at least an hour or so. And I couldn't really get through the day without that. I think a lot of us can relate. But from there, I go to the office, and that's when I'm in work mode. It's the boundary that I have here, this physical boundary that's a completely separate room in the house. That is like my on switch. And I know that at that point, everything that I do is going to be work related. It's going to be going after the life that I want, achieving the goals that I've set out for myself. And I start that by really sort of reflecting. And this is something that I have incorporated to my morning routine somewhat recently. I'd heard a lot about it, but it's a concept called morning pages. And you can read about it in a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And that's basically where you just brain dump for 3 full pages. You write down whatever's on your mind. And when I initially heard about this, I thought, oh, that seems like a really big waste of time. Like, I'm going to sit there for 30 minutes and, brain dump. I can probably do without that one. But I told myself I would do it for at least a week. And what I realized is that when you're an entrepreneur, when you're working, from home, you're not interacting with people as much, you don't realize like how jumbled your thoughts can get and how excited you can be about certain things. So that's sort of my release. That's my way to get all of those thoughts out of my head so they're not clogging me up throughout the day, and I can actually focus on the tasks that I want to do. So if I've got any crazy big ideas that have popped into mind, I'll write about those. Or if I'm thinking about a video that I uploaded and maybe some analytics, and I'll write about that. But the bottom line is, at the end of that usually 30-minute session, my mind's completely clear, and it's like it's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And that pretty much wraps up most of the morning routine for now, at least.
Well, that's an amazing morning routine. And I think listening to you, one of the things that I'm really hearing is that you do such a great job at setting clear boundaries between work and home life. And again, I can't emphasize that enough to those who are viewing, that it's so important to have that, because it really becomes such a blurry place to be living when you're mixing the two. So I really have to emphasize that I think it's important, even if you don't have a space for an office, but maybe it's a dedicated work desk or a work chair or whatever it is, make that your workplace and keep your work there. Try not to bring it into the rest of the areas of your house, because what ends up happening is, if you start mixing work with the areas where you're relaxing, it's a harder time to then relax, and it's harder for you to be present with your husband or your wife or whoever it is, when you had worked there previously. So I think it's great that you have that dedicated space, and that's something that I know has helped my own productivity, and it's something that I'm trying to be even more strict on, is having that. But what I also loved was that you mentioned you get up and you fix your hair, or little things that sound silly if you're not working from home, but wash your face, put makeup on, and just go through that same routine you go through when you are seeing other humans. That can't be that has to be emphasized, because it's true. It's easy to work from home and a few days in realize you haven't gotten out of your pajamas, and you start to feel kind of homeless, and it starts impacting your productivity. So I love that you've brought a process around that, and it's kind of borrowed from when you were working full time for someone else. So that's fantastic. And 2 other things I'll mention that I do for my routine, which I think you mentioned. So the brain dump. So I always, in the evening at the end of my day, I'll review what I want to accomplish the next day. And I just found, for me, if I don't do that, then I'm thinking about it the rest of the day or the evening and into my night, and I have a really hard time being present and getting a good sleep. And then in the morning, I'll do the same thing as you mentioned. It's my, I guess, my own version of a brain dump, and reviewing the priorities for that day.
Yeah, I think that is so important too. And I could honestly even do the evening pages and do that as well. Really, a good, successful morning really starts the night before. Like you were saying, you like to do that because if not, you can't get a good night's sleep. And if there's one thing I've learned throughout this journey and throughout just trying to get everything done when I can get it done, if you're running on no sleep, eventually it's going to catch up to you. You can't be productive and be focused if you're sleep deprived. And I think a lot of us would be surprised to know that if you get less than, I think it's 5 hours of sleep, then your mental capacity at that point is like a legal drunk person. So somebody who would not pass a breathalyzer test just by lack of sleep. And I learned that through a book called Sleep Smarter. It's a really great read. If you're serious about productivity, it
Yeah.
really does start with your sleep.
Absolutely. Sleep is the most important thing for really all areas of your life. And this is something that my boyfriend's really helped me with a lot lately, because I had very poor work life boundaries and I had to bring more structure on that. And it was really impacting my sleep quite a lot. And so some of the things that I would relay to the audience is, we mentioned having clear work areas, but at the very least, you have to draw a very hard line. Never work in your bedroom. Okay, your bed
Yeah,
is for sleeping and for relaxation. It is not for working. And I think that that's really, really important, because you don't want your brain to associate stress with sleep or work with sleep. And then also just being conscious of what I've learned. It sounds a bit crazy, but blue light and exposure to blue light. So that's, your fluorescent lights in your house. It literally suppresses melatonin production, which helps you sleep. And so just, even turning the lights off in your house, or, wearing blue light glasses, or using Edison bulbs that have a lower amount of blue light in it, so that your melatonin does start being produced and that you're better able to fall asleep. And there's a whole science to that, which we don't have to get into today. But I think I've never read that book, but sleep is so important. So we'll include a link to that, because I think spending time thinking about how can you optimize your sleep is going to help increase your productivity hugely.
definitely. It was a big turning point for me.
Okay, so speaking about turning points, let's talk about distractions in your day. So I know a lot of people can get easily tempted by Facebook or social media or shiny objects. Do you have a routine, or do you have a process for how you deal with distractions in your day so that you're staying focused?
I do. I like to break those into two different types of distractions, we'll say. So the shiny object syndrome, or the squirrel syndrome, that has a potentially to be really good, but it's also not so great when you're really trying to focus on something else. And then the notifications, the emails, and that sort of thing, I sort of treat those a little differently than I do when a big idea strikes. So for those big ideas, those distractions, and they happen all the time, I think it's really important that you don't suppress those. If you get the idea for a new project or a new stitch or just a new way of doing something, don't ignore it, but don't allow yourself to slip into that like slippery slope and go down the rabbit trail. Typically, what I'll do is I actually have my crazy ideas notebook. Those crazy ideas, and they're usually crazy ideas, but some of them are good. I write them down. I just keep track of them. And if I'm still thinking about that thing 2 days from now, then I've realized, okay, this might be going somewhere and it can earn a spot on my calendar. I have mentioned before that I time block, and I religiously time block everything. So if a crazy idea has turned into a little bit more than maybe a crazy idea, then it will earn a spot. But I don't let that completely distract me from what I'm doing right then, because like I said before, the whole task switching thing, I might be thinking about something else and I'm not fully invested in what I'm doing. So I know that I personally am not a multitasker. I don't think it's something that I will ever brag about, because I think it's really difficult for people to do more than one thing really well. I know for me personally, I like to focus on one thing, and I can focus completely on it, do it really well, and I usually don't have to go back and fix that. But in the instances where I have tried to do two things at once, I almost always have to go back and fix both of those things. So that's really the shiny object syndrome for me. As far as the notifications and the emails go, there's another study that is pretty well known that we do our best and most creative work in the morning. Now, it might not be true for everybody. You're either a morning person or you're not. For me personally, I know that I do my best work in the morning. So anytime before noon. And I like to schedule my really important work, my really creative time, things that I have to be really on my game before noon, because I know that that's when I'm most productive. And things like email and notifications and comment reply and that sort of thing, it's something that I can do a lot more naturally. I don't feel like I have to put a lot of brain power into it. And so I like to reserve those things for the end of the day. Now I will go in and check my email first thing in the morning. I've got sort of like a startup time block on my calendar that's about 30 minutes. Sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't, but that's really reserved for really urgent emails. If I know that I'm doing something on that day, if I've got podcast interviews scheduled, I want to go in and check my email to make sure my guests don't have questions. Or if I'm working with a sponsor or that sort of thing. But I will typically save all of the other emails that come through, the ones that aren't really urgent, for the afternoon, because then I know that I've done all of my best work and now I can just sort of start winding down. It's really a winding down process for me. Now, notifications on the phone, that's like a whole nother beast. That's something I don't allow to happen because I know that I don't have enough willpower to like leave it be. So for me, there are two notifications that come in on my phone on a daily basis. That those are emergency contacts who know that please don't text me or call me unless it's an actual emergency during work hours. And notifications from my calendar, from the time blocking. And that way, no matter where I am, whether I'm on my computer or I'm crocheting a project and I'm outside of the office, that I have a reminder that says, hey, in 5 minutes, you're due to do this thing. And that's pretty much how I've learned to deal with my own sort of weakness as far as checking in. It's fun, right? We love to be on social, we love to interact with people, but you can really let yourself get carried away. That can really suck up a lot of your time during your day. And if you spread it out in little bits, like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, that adds up a lot quicker than if you just say, I'm dedicating 30 minutes to doing this. And the other thing I mentioned was, sort of themed days. I typically like to do a lot of my administrative work on Thursdays, and I have bigger time blocks that are dedicated for that. So I'm at inbox zero on Thursdays for, my email, for Facebook, for Instagram, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that that's really, really important is you have to be aware of where maybe you lack willpower, or you can say that, hey, I know I'm not strong enough right now to handle these notifications coming in. So you're proactively setting control around your day by eliminating those distractions. So I think that that's really, really important. And again, it comes back to some of the other elements you talked about earlier, which is time blocking and building in time for you to check in socially. And I think that you have to distinguish between when you're using social for your business and when you're using social personally. And I
Yeah.
think that, that outside of work hours, that's a whole other topic. If you want to indulge in social media personally, that's outside your work hours, but being careful to use social for work during work hours and then time blocking it into your schedule.
Yes, definitely. There is a podcaster who says what doesn't get scheduled doesn't get done. And I totally live by that, not because I've chosen to, but because for me personally, it really is true.
Yeah, I have to agree. And 5, 10 years ago, you would never hear me saying this. And when I started my business, I told myself, I started this business because I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and it's my business and I can decide when I'm doing it. But even if you're not, consider yourself a planner, I think it's really important that as you start getting busier and busier, you'll see that you're just going to be more efficient, and you will have more control over your day as you start scheduling these things in. So it's easy to think, well, that puts a lot of control and lack of freedom on your day. But in actuality, I found that it creates a lot more freedom in my business and in my life by scheduling those things.
That's so true. I've experienced that myself too. That first year, I was all about like just fly by the seat of my pants. I want to do what I want to do because I can and it's fun and I love it. But then when you get to the point where your, significant other says, "Hey, do you want to go away for a weekend? We'll, be off on Friday and Monday." And you're thinking, "Well, I actually was supposed to publish something that day, or that I had a deadline that day." Because I wasn't planning in advance for situations like that, I had to say no to a lot of really fun things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because you have to make sure that your schedule is working with the other areas of your life and the other people in your life. So,
Definitely.
speaking of all of these things that we need to get done, how do you keep track of all the things you need to get done in your business? Are there any tools that you use?
Yes, and this is the part I totally geek out on. So there are 8 major tools that I use, and I would love to kind of breeze through all of them so that you get a full picture of, what it looks like on the extreme end, and then you can just sort of pick and choose what really works well for you. But also, more importantly, know what function each tool, what purpose it serves, and realize that that's something that you need for your business.
I'd love to see those.
So, the first major tool that I use, and I've mentioned it here before, and that's Google Calendar.
Mm.
Now, of course, I use the whole Google suite, but I really live by Google Calendar. And I didn't realize this, but it gives you the ability to literally make appointments for yourself. Like you might go into your Google Calendar or your Apple Calendar, whatever device you're using, and say, I have a doctor's appointment on this day at this time. And that's an appointment. You keep that time, right? We feel like somebody is depending on us to show up. But it's really easy to like not show up for your own appointments. And what I have realized is that when I time block, I'm creating appointments for myself, and I know that I may not let somebody else down necessarily if I don't do that thing, but I'm letting myself down. And I'm being in those situations where I possibly might have to say no to something that comes up because I didn't manage my time well. So Google Calendar has been by far the biggest thing to help me keep track of and manage my time. It manages my month, my week, my day, the patterns. I mean, every single thing is in there. And I would encourage anybody to just try it out. It might not be right for you. I went back and forth on calendar blocking because for a while it felt really constricting. It made me feel like I was suffocated, that if I didn't finish the thing when I thought I would finish it, that I was a failure or that I wasn't productive that day. And that wasn't true. Those are things you have to sort of work through. But eventually I got to the point where I depended on that because now I don't have to spend any time in the morning saying, okay, what needs to be done today? I just open up calendar and it says everything that I need to do. So I'm saving all of my decision making skills for something else that actually requires that decision making.
And that
So Google
energy.
Calendar, big one.
Okay, that's great.
Now, the next one is a tool that's completely free, at least at the time of this recording, that you can get it on your computer and you can get it on your phone. I am an Android user, so I know it's available there. I'm not 100% sure on Apple users, but it's called Toggle. And if I can share my screen here, I would like to show you what it looks like. So when you go to Toggle, and it's spelled a little bit different, so that's why I wanted to sort of point it out to you. What Toggle is basically like your timesheet, and it allows you to say specifically what you're doing, and you can assign a project to it, and you can assign a tag to it, and then it will just keep track of everything that you're doing. And you might say, why on earth would you spend extra time tracking what you're doing? Like that's just an extra step. It wastes time. But what I found is that I'm able to use the data from this so that I can plan more efficiently, so that I can know that it takes me 2 hours to edit a podcast from start to finish. It actually doesn't take quite that long. But I know how much it takes me to do certain things, and so I can make educated
Mm.
guesses at how long it actually takes to do something. And that's not something you'll know right away. It's not something that you'll be able to say, yeah, it'll take me 4 hours to knit this hat, or it'll take me 10 hours to knit this hat, whatever it may be. You really do have to collect some data. You're going to be different on different days. Some days you'll be more efficient than others. Some days you'll have more distractions than others. And with a tool like Toggle, you're able to look at that data and really see the trend of how much time it takes you to do something.
And that is
So
so important for making good business decisions, because ultimately, if you're not in control of your time, you don't know how to make those decisions and what's actually earning a return on your investment.
for sure. Yeah, it was something that I started actually from day one. I was using a different software. My podcast listeners have heard me talk about Timesheet. That's
Mhm.
another free app that you can get on your phone, but that has sort of like a freemium, at least the way I understand it, a freemium plan where you have it for free on your phone, but you can't have it on your computer. And for me, getting into my phone during the day, seeing something that might pop up that's I know that's really difficult for me to let go of. So I wanted to remove that from my phone. It's there for when I'm crocheting and I'm not in my office in front of my computer, but I can use it on my computer. It's easier for me to type there. It's a really cool tool. I've been using it about a month now.
Okay. Toggle, I'll have to check that out. I use another one, but it's the UI is not so great, so I'll check that out.
Mm. This one's got a pretty good UI and certain applications for people depending on like what you're actually creating. If you are a maker and you're preparing for a market that you do every single year, then you might name that market a certain project. And then from there, you can tag it and say, well, this is my crochet time. This is my planning time. This is the time it takes me to buy the products or figure out what yarn I need, what supplies I need. And so when you're finished, like sort of wrapping that up, then you can look at it and say, okay, this year I spent uh, 50 hours crocheting all of the things that I needed for this market. And you can use that to, plan for the next year too.
Yeah, and also figure out how much you really truly earn, because you have to pay for your time. And that's something we go
Exactly.
into more detail in the craft session and the craft fair session, but that's an important point.
Yeah. And another tool that I use that's more relatable to the content creator, so people who are doing patterns, who have a blog, who have a podcast, or anything like that. And this is a tool called CoSchedule. And I've
Mm.
been using this one for about, gosh, probably 2 years, almost 2 years now. And this is not a free tool. There's different versions you can get. It's about $40 a month, so it's not a huge investment, but it is something. It's probably not something you want to do if you're just starting your blog. Don't invest money unless you're getting a return in it. But for me, I started using this, gosh, probably 3 or 4 years into it. So I knew that I was actually bringing money in with it. So I was able to say, okay, I can send some money out because of it. But what CoSchedule does is two things. It allows you to manage your content calendar and schedule your social shares. And I initially looked into it because I wanted the social shares and I didn't want to pay for multiple apps. So if you've ever looked for this, you know that on something like Hootsuite, you can schedule for Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and that sort of thing. But it's missing two of the big ones that we use here in a more visual and more creative industry, and that's Pinterest and Instagram. Those were big. Now there is a tool that allows you to schedule on those things, and we'll talk about that one next. But I didn't want to pay for two tools. I didn't feel like I could justify that cost yet. So CoSchedule will allow you to schedule your social shares to all of those social networks, to Pinterest, to Instagram, to Facebook, to Twitter, to Tumblr if you're using it. And I think even LinkedIn, I think it covers pretty much all the bases. I don't use that one personally. And in addition to that, though, and I found this after the fact, it is a huge beast in terms of managing your content calendar. And it allows you to get really granular with those different tasks. And honestly, CoSchedule is what taught me all of those things that we mentioned before, that we said you're not going to know right away everything you need to do to get from point A to point B to publish the thing or make the thing. It happens over time. CoSchedule allowed me to create tasks for each thing, and you can add to it, you can take away from it. And by doing it over and over, I sort of just figured out everything I needed to do in order to, say, publish a new pattern. But it does it automatically for you. So you can set up a particular type of project, and you can give that project a deadline and say, I know that I need to start designing the pattern 3 weeks before it's due. So you can set those things up. And I want to give you an idea of what co-schedule here looks like. So it's pretty much everything you need. I would say now I use it a little less than I used to. I depend on it a little bit less because I do have those Google Sheets and that sort of thing in place. But I do the majority of my social scheduling, my planning, and really like month to month things right here in CoSchedule.
That's awesome. And it looks really, really nice as well and easier to use.
It is very user friendly. That is one thing that they are pretty well known for, and their customer support is so good. You can send them an email if you have a problem, you have an answer usually within a couple of hours.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, so co-schedule, and again, we'll include a link to that below this video.
Yes. So from there, another social scheduling app that I like to use is Tailwind. I'm sure a lot of us have heard of that. And it is pretty much the Pinterest beast of social scheduling. And I waited so long to jump on the Tailwind bandwagon, but I'm so glad I did. I still do use CoSchedule to schedule Pinterest shares, but what Tailwind does that CoSchedule doesn't is allow you to schedule other people's pins. And it gives you analytics on the pins that are performing well, all of them, but you get to know which pins are performing well so that you can reschedule them to maybe a different board. And before I started using Tailwind, I was blocking about an hour every single day, so 5 days a week, to just doing Pinterest, just trying to market on Pinterest. And when I switched over to Tailwind, I'm spending like not even 2 hours a week. It's pretty incredible. So I'm getting back so much time, and that is definitely worth the cost. Now they do have a free startup plan. I think they allow you to schedule 100 pins for free, so you can try it out and make sure it works, but it's really affordable after you do that too. So if you know that you're bringing in money through Pinterest and you can prove that you're doing so, you can prove that you will earn back what you're putting into it, I would say definitely check into Tailwind.
Yeah, and for most people launching a handmade business, Pinterest is going to be one of your top traffic sources. So, having Google Analytics installed on your blog, that will help you see, or your website or whatever it is, help you see where your traffic source is coming from and help you justify whether you can make that investment.
For sure. And so moving on to, it's still sort of related to the social shares, but one tool that I really use all the time, and it does save me a lot of time, is Canva. And that is to create those social images. Now I do have Photoshop. I have the whole Adobe suite in order to be able to do the things that I do, but I prefer to create my images in Canva. It's a completely free, I mean, you can purchase upgrades and that sort of thing, but it's completely free, but there's templates in there. And I love graphic design. I sort of like love to play and dabble around with that, but that's a rabbit trail for me. So if I can go in and see something, like see a template that's already made and I love the way it works and maybe it jives with my brand, then I can just use that, right? There's no point in reinventing the wheel. If that stuff is there and it's free, go ahead and use it. So that saves me a lot of time in terms of creating those social images.
Canva is amazing, and I think we've recommended this on a number of the other classes. But I mean, the design templates that are in there, even if you don't have any design skills, it's going to really help you create a polished final product.
Definitely. And another tool that I like to use is, and I'm sure we've heard of this one too, Trello.
Yep.
Trello is so powerful. You can do so much with Trello, but the way I use it to be productive and to manage my time is to use it like a project management tool, which I think that's sort of how it started. That's why it was developed. But for big projects, like I do a crochet challenge for Warm Up America every single year. There are tons and tons of moving parts to that. There's different people that are involved. There's usually multiple patterns. There's usually multiple videos, and there's different dates that are important, like deadlines and that sort of thing. I manage all of that with Trello. So I'm not doing a lot of day-to-day stuff in Trello, but I do really big projects for that. It's also really good. I could see it being used for markets. So you can keep track of
Mm.
everything that you need to have, the different markets that you're going to, the different dates, and that sort of thing. And
I
it's completely free too.
Yeah, it's really one of the best tools you should look at for project management and just to-do lists in general. We use it for a lot of different things. I use it both personally and professionally, so that's a great tool. And I know that there is a premium account, but it starts out free.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you can use it free forever, but you just have maybe less things. So for what I use it for, I just have the free one and it's actually really great.
I love it.
Yeah. So another tool I've been using actually really since like day one is Evernote. And that's another completely free tool. I'm sure there's probably upgrades you can buy on that one as well, but I use the free version. And that's really the bridge to the gap between my personal life and my work life. That's sort of like my balance there. There's a lot of times when I'm out and I have an idea for a pattern, I'll put it in Evernote. Or there's a lot of times where in the evening I'm sitting down on the couch and I'm sort of relaxing, but I'm still crocheting and still working on something. I actually record patterns in Evernote because I I can access it on my phone. If I'm using my iPad, I can have it there. If I'm on my computer, I can use it there. So I really love that it goes across devices. And I use it as a way to really just organize the patterns, like every little thing that's within the pattern, different steps, the type of yarn that I'm using, the crochet hook size that I'm using, because I always forget that part, and the gauge and that sort of thing. So that's a really useful and, like I said, free tool where you can really just keep track of all the things that are going through your head about the particular project that you're working on.
Yeah, Evernote is actually, I'm really glad you mentioned it. It's a tool that I haven't used in quite a while. Ended up getting a new phone and I kind of just came off of it. And it is really useful. I'm going to pick that one up again.
Yeah, I like to create a notebook for each project, and I even keep some of that like copy and paste stuff, like things that you know that you use all the time. Instagram users, you'll know about this, hashtags. Nobody wants to sit there and type all of those hashtags all the time. They're actually in Evernote, and whenever I create an Instagram post, I go in there, copy and paste, and it's a time saver.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime you can streamline your processes, you get that time back in other areas of your life. And I think that's what's so great about a lot of the tools you've mentioned so far is that you're able to reclaim time that you can use in other ways.
Yeah. And one final tool I want to mention, it's like it's out in left field, but Spotify.
Mm.
Spotify is something that I recently have sort of started using, but the focus playlists that they have in there, never underestimate music. When you're sitting down and you know you have to write something or you know you really have to focus on something, it's so distracting to have music with lyrics playing in the background, at least for me personally. And it was a really big eye opener when I first heard about their focus, the playlist that they have, that it really does help you to sort of get in the right mindset of what you need to do. So if I'm writing, I'm listening to their deep focus playlist. You can even look that one up. It's super chill. It's got like some cool instrumental sort of things, and that's I've just trained myself over time that when I hear that, I'm in writing mode.
Hmm.
And then when I'm wanting to do something a little bit more fun and upbeat, then I might listen to a completely different playlist. So, yeah, never underestimate music and how it'll affect your productivity.
Yeah, you know what? That's such a great one. And it's kind of out of the box. Most people wouldn't think about music for productivity. But as far as reducing the amount of time it takes to kind of get into the flow and to get into focus, I found the exact same thing that it can really help me focus faster and focus better for whatever the tasks that I'm working on. And I have kind of my own playlist on YouTube, but I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out.
So we've talked about a lot of different great tools. Trello, I love. Canva, I love. All of the tools you mentioned are tools that you use in your day to day for time management. And anyone who's watching this can surely see that you take time management and productivity very seriously. And that you've just made a decision to be in control of your time and to be in control of the business that you want to have. And I think that that's just such a powerful thing to have, is that constantly reminding yourself that as you start a business, you have to decide what kind of business you want that fits into your life. And so making that active decision to put boundaries and protect your time, it becomes more and more important as you get going. But I think it's an important habit to start right off of the hop. And there's a lot of tips that you gave on this call, even simple things from, if you're working from home, getting dressed every day, that really put you in the right mental framework to increase your productivity and your happipiness overall, in terms of managing the work-life balance between running a business and having your own life too. So with that said, as we kind of come to a close to this class, are there any final words of wisdom or anything you would like to recap that you think are very important for our viewers to just leave with?
Well, I think it's important to realize that success leaves clues.
Mm.
And I don't want anybody to walk away from this and say, I'm going to do everything Brittany said to do. I'm going to do everything to the T that she does, and I will be very productive, because it's probably not going to work for you. What I would love for you to do instead of that, though, is listen to the cues that we've talked about. So things like creating habits so that you don't have to make so many decisions. So you sort of take that out of the element, and you use different tools and that sort of thing. So take those clues and see how you can use them to your own unique strengths, right? We all have different things that we're really great at, and we all have things that we're not so great at. And those tools are really there to help support you and help you be more productive. So if you're able to do that, to listen and try maybe one or two of these things and do them one at a time. Don't try to do everything all at once. You'll drive yourself crazy. And really be in tune with yourself and what's going on and how productive you were. Never underestimate the power of writing things down or taking notes, because you probably won't remember 2 weeks from now when you're looking back and saying, should I continue doing this thing? Is it working for me? It's so much better to look back, and you can prove to yourself whether it worked or not, and whether it's worth continuing to spend some of your valuable time on. That's the bottom line. We all have the same amount of time in every single day, but how productive we are in that time starts with knowing your strengths, knowing how much time you have to dedicate to it, and being able to manage your time so that you can not only have a great business that you can feel good about, but have a great life that you can be happy to live.
Yeah, it's something that you just said that I absolutely love, and that's that we're all given time equally, right? We all have the exact same number of hours every single day, and it's how you decide to use those hours and use those minutes in order to create that life and that business that you want. So thank you so much for being here and sharing so many of these valuable time-saving tips and productivity tips that I really think that if you pick one or two to implement right away, that's something that you're going to notice a huge benefit from right away, not just in your business, but in your personal life too. So thank you.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. I love talking about this as much as I love talking about crochet and knitting. So it was my pleasure.
Yeah, you can really tell that this is something that you've really developed over time, and you have so much great insight, and you've read a lot on the topic, and so this is going to be immensely valuable to everyone who's watching it. So thank you again, and to our audience, thank you so much for tuning into this session. We've got more great sessions to come, so stay tuned.